Hello, and welcome to the OR Manager Conference Encore virtual event. I'm Cindy Kilgore, the Education Coordinator for OR Manager, and I'm pleased to welcome you here for our keynote session, Unlocking the Power of Purpose. As you watch this keynote, we encourage you to submit your questions throughout the presentation in the Q&A section on your screen. We're going to show the keynote that took place in Chicago, and after the recording, we will come on live with Richard. He'll be ready to answer your questions and connect with you directly. So get those questions in now. Please join me for Richard Leider's keynote address. To introduce this morning's keynote speaker, Richard Leider. Richard Leider is an international best-selling author and coach. Richard is founder of Inventure, the purpose company, where the mission is to help people to unlock the power of purpose and answer that question. He is ranked by Forbes as one of the top 5 most respected coaches. Along the way, Richard has written 11 books, including 3 bestsellers, which have sold over 1 million copies. The Power of Purpose and Repacking Your Bags are considered classics in the personal growth field. His latest book, Who Do You Want to Be When You Grow Old, is a defining book on the power of purposeful aging. Widely viewed as a pioneer of the global purpose movement, his work has been featured in many media sources, and his PBS special, The Power of Purpose, was viewed by millions of people. He has taken his purpose message to all 50 states, Canada, and 4 continents. And he has advised everyone from AARP to the National Football League to the U.S. State Department. It is now my pleasure to welcome Richard Leider to the stage.
Thank you, Cindy and Mike and the committee for the privilege of being here this morning. And I've really enjoyed my conversations last night and along the way with all of you. So, so unlock the power of purpose. I want to start by saying that I've been a student of purpose now for over 4 decades, and I'm still, the future belongs to the learners, not the knowers, and I'm still a learner on this topic on a regular basis. But I want to share some of what I've learned along the way and make it practical. You know, it's all about practices ultimately. Well, as leaders, managers, we're only as good as our practices ultimately. And so to start with, I want to say that the pandemic has obviously opened up the lens on a lot of things. I have a colleague, and when you call him and leave a message on his voicemail, he says this: at the sound of the tone, please leave your answer to life's 2 eternal questions. Who are you and what do you want? Well, a lot of people, the pandemic has opened up that lens in terms of who am I and what do I want? And one of the most dangerous questions I find in the work I do, one of the most dangerous questions is, well, what do you do? And as you know, you're not what you do, it's who you bring to what you do. So what I want to do this morning is a deep dive into the who of leadership and what we really care about and what drives us, the whole concept of purpose in so many ways. So I've been interviewing people over the age of 65 for now 3 decades, older adults, and asking them if they could live their life over again, what would they do differently? And I've written about this, studied this, and worked for 5 years with AARP as the curator of their Life Reimagined laboratory on the future of aging. So there are 3 themes I'd like to start with right now that I have learned that go through the whole test of time. Theme number 1 is, and I'll say this is like a life checkup. This whole talk this morning is like pushing the pause button, stepping back, looking at the who I am and what I bring to life and to the world. starting with older adults and then looking backwards. So the first theme is people said if they could live their life over again, they would be more reflective the second time around. And when I asked them, well, when were you reflective? They often said that it was during a crisis. It was during a time like the pandemic and like any other kind of crucible in life where it forces us to step back and really see the bigger picture. And I said, well, why didn't you do that automatically along the way? And we're talking over time, not just during the time of phones and internet and all of that. And they all said the same thing: busy, too busy, always going somewhere, never being anywhere, until I had to step back and look at things. And so busyness is something that in many ways is an epidemic for people, and it's leading a lot to isolation, as we know and as you know. We're over-connected in some ways and under-connected, and that's why being here in person is so great, as Mike said, and it really feels like a breakthrough to actually be here with you in this way. I have a new book coming, just came out in July, and I'm on a virtual book tour right now, and so it's amazing how that is so different than in the past, where you actually were in bookstores or doing things like that, but it's okay. So number one is reflection. So I'm inviting you to be a little reflective right now. You may even be skeptical about purpose, but if you have a pulse, you have a purpose. Purpose is fundamental. It is not a luxury. It is fundamental, as many of you and most of you know, to health, to healing, to happiness, and ultimately even to longevity, as we're finding out. Second theme in interviewing older adults is courage or risk-taking. They said, if I could live my life over again, I would be more courageous the second time around. I would take more risks. And they weren't talking about financial risks. They weren't talking about climbing mountains or doing anything like that, although that might have been part of the backstory. But what they were talking about really was work and love. They wish they would have had a better fit at work, and they wish they would have been more present in so many ways in different aspects, including work in their lives. And so purpose really is fundamental, as I said, to life and to living purposefully, but it takes choice. It takes courage to step into it. So, and it takes courage to actually name it. The third thing is people said if they could live their life over again, they wish they would have understood that mattering matters. Purpose is not, as I said, a luxury. That at the end of life, we all leave a legacy. In fact, we leave a legacy every day. And so, spoiler alert here, purpose is about making a difference in one person's life every day. There are 1,440 purpose moments in a day. If you take sleep out of it, it would be a little bit less. But the purpose is really about action. It's about acting, and action leads to clarity. Action leads to clarity. We can step back and reflect, but where we really learn about life is through the action that leads to clarity. No one ever learned to ride a bike by reading a manual. They did it by getting on a bike and trying it. And so I'm going to invite you with a couple challenges in a minute about some things about purpose. So as we look at aging and we look at life, there are three fundamentals. I call it the 3 M's: money, medicine, and meaning. And medicine is not necessarily pharmaceuticals to include that, and vaccines, but it's about health. So to live a thorough, purposeful life, we need enough money. How much is enough is different for all of us. And we also need health. But you all know people who have enough money and enough health, but not meaning, and are alone or lonesome or not engaged in certain ways. And you know other people who don't have a lot of health and enough, perhaps, resources that have meaning in their lives and are fully engaged in certain ways. So let's look at this life checkup. Purpose is the answer to the question, why? And so oftentimes, and I'm going to say this right now, there's purpose with a big P and purpose with a little p. Purpose with a big P is kind of, oh, it has to be noble. I have to have a cause. I have to have work at a place that is noble, etc., which is good. It's a good thing. But what I really want to talk about here is purpose with a small p, the everyday life of living purposefully. It's not about having a purpose. It's about living purposefully, working and leading purposefully in many ways. One of my favorite quotes about the question why do I get up in the morning? Why did you get up in the morning? 1 out of 3 people, I find in the studies and research I've done, 1 out of 3 people is now these days missing that why am I doing what I'm doing? And sometimes it's about burnout, sometimes it's about rust out. You know, burnout, overdoing, rust out, underbeing, and sometimes it's about both. But oftentimes it could be just a stage of career or a stage or age of life that we have to revisit the why. And every new idea goes through 3 stages. Think of new ideas you brought forth in your management and leadership. Every new idea goes through, first of all, usually ridicule. Why would we do this? Why do we need to do that? Secondly, there's opposition, sometimes very aggressive opposition to a new idea. And ultimately, if it stands the test of time, it becomes self-evident. Why do you get up in the morning? And needing an answer to that has become self-evident in many ways right now. My favorite quote is from the American essayist E.B. White, who said this. He said, "I arise in the morning, torn between a desire to save the world and a desire to savor the world. This makes it hard to plan the day." Well, in all due respect to E.B. White, we both want to save, not literally perhaps, but save meaning make our contribution, make our difference on the planet, and savor the balance between enjoying life and being part of and engaged as part of life. And so how about you? If it's 1 out of 3 people who has missed out these days on that whole sense of why, just pause for a moment here and look at the person on your left for a minute. And if they do they look like they're fully awake and that they probably answered the why question this morning? If they look pretty good, look at the person on your right. If they both look pretty good, then you're the 1 out of 3. So maybe this is it's time for the checkup we're talking about here. So purpose with a small p. My purpose with a big P is to help others unlock the power of purpose. Not discover it out there, unlock it in here and give it a name and a practice. Purpose has 3 elements to it in the way that I study and look at. Purpose is a choice, it's a verb. Purpose is a verb, it's something we act on a day-to-day basis. Secondly, purpose is a path. It's a choice we make to live and work in a certain way. And purpose is always beyond the self. It's always about the difference we make with others in some way or another in life. And the third thing, purpose is a practice. It's something we do on a regular basis. I had lunch a while back with the happiest man in the world. You know who the happiest man in the world is? If you ever, don't Google it right now, but you can Google it later. His name is Mathieu Ricard. He's a French scientist who at the age of 29 went to India and never came back. He became a Buddhist monk, he became a scholar on altruism and purpose, the science of purpose, and became a translator for the Dalai Lama. And he travels the world, and one of the things he did, and they do, is they bring these monks and others to the neuroscience labs in the US, and they measure their brainwave activity, and they measure all kinds of different things, and they found that Mathieu Ricard lit up the pleasure center of the brain more than anybody they'd ever measured, including the Dalai Lama. And therefore, they call him the happiest man in the world, and he's not very happy about it. The reason he's not very happy about it is because he said, when asked by me over lunch, I said, how do you get to be the happiest man in the world? I got to introduce you in a few minutes to about 5,000 people at the University of Minnesota Center for Spirituality and Healing, where I'm a senior fellow. And he only said one word, practice. And I said, well, you got to give me a little bit more to go on. He said, no, it's practice. It's something we can all do. And through action comes clarity. And through action comes happiness and fulfillment in certain ways. So let's look a little bit at this. Science and faith both agree that purpose is not a luxury, but is in many ways fundamental, as I said, to health, to healing, to happiness, and other things. When I was doing a PBS special, I toured neuroscience labs across the country, and one of the people at Johns Hopkins held up a pill like this in this picture, and he said, "Richard, you see this pill? This will increase the quality of people's lives, even with dementia and Alzheimer's. It'll reduce the incidence of macroscopic stroke by 41%, and will help with sleep apnea and add 7 to 10 years to your life." He said, "Would you buy this?" And I said, "Well, of course, but is there one, and how much would it cost?" And he said, "It's free." And he smiled and he said, "It's purpose. We now can measure purpose in the brain and purpose in some of these activities." So I think I'm just saying here that purpose is self-evident. So let me please give you right now the prescription for purpose. And please jot this down or make a note of this, because I'm going to come back to it in a minute and ask about practices around this. So the RX, the prescription for purpose, is only 2 words, universally across the globe. 2 words end up being my main message here: grow and give. Are you growing and giving? You're here growing. Growing and giving is the essential message of purpose. If we get up in the morning and ask ourselves, what am I going to do today? How am I going to grow and give? Then you're living purposefully in certain ways. And so I taught recently with a woman who won the Nobel Prize in medicine for the telomere effect. Now, you know more about this than I do, but she wrote the book, co-authored the book, The Telomere Effect, and measured the telomere activity and its relationship to purpose and its relationship to longevity and health. Her name is Dr. Elizabeth Blackburn, and along with Dr. Alyssa Epple wrote the book, The Effect, and said basically that it has a profound effect, and she won the Nobel Prize for it. So you come to your own decisions about the fundamental of purpose, but I'm crystal clear as I age and as I work with people across the lifespan, because purpose is age agnostic. I find as many young people interested in purpose as midlife and older adults these days. So you've got the prescription. You can't walk out of here saying, "I don't have a purpose." I just gave you one to chew on a little bit. Grow and give. And I'll give you some practices around that in a minute. One of my teachers was this man, Viktor Frankl. How many of you have heard of Viktor Frankl before? Yeah, quite a few people. He wrote the book, Man's Search for Meaning, and I consider him to be an exemplar in the field of purpose and aging and things like this. But Frankl was a Viennese psychiatrist, neurologist, who at the height of his career in Vienna, Austria, he was training resident physicians there in what he called logotherapy, or meaning therapy. And at the height of his work, his grandparents, his parents, his pregnant wife, Tilly, and his siblings were all taken in a boxcar to the concentration camps. Every one of them died. He was liberated after 3.5 years. He weighed 87 pounds. And he was liberated and went back to Vienna, healed, and wrote the book, Man's Search for Meaning, in 9 days. I had a chance when I got out of graduate school in counseling psychology to study with him for a solid week, and it changed my life forever. You've all had fortuitous encounters with people who changed your trajectory, who changed your life in certain ways, that pointed to a direction or helped bring out more of who you were in life. And he said this, he said, the last of the human freedoms basically is choice. It's to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. Well, the pandemic has put up circumstances, but so is life in general. People go through divorces, they go through economic downturns and upturns, they move places, they go through all kinds of job and other career-related crucibles in life. And this whole business of choice leads to both resilience and fulfillment in many ways. And he talked about what he called the mindset of tragic optimism. To be optimistic, not Pollyannish, But to get up in the morning and give somebody else a kind word, a slurp of soup, a hug, hope for the future, he said helped people stay alive and gave them the will to live. And he said, what about now? People who have money, medicine, but not meaning. What is it that, why are they not activating those choices and becoming victims in certain ways? So we all are an experiment of one. Every one of you is an experiment of one. You get to choose. And so how do we go about making these kinds of choices? He said this, don't ask, what is my purpose? Ask this, what is life asking of me now, today, in this circumstance that I'm in? And he went on to say this, which is a mantra for me, say yes to life in spite of everything. Are you an example of saying yes to life in spite of everything? We all have adversities. We all have, sometimes we're pushed by pain, sometimes we're pulled by possibility, but we all have choices along the way in life. So what did you want to be when you grew up? Did you want to do what you're doing right now? Remember that question? What did you want to be when you grew up? Well, I grew up with this mental model right here. Maybe you did too. Learn, earn, retire. That model is dead on arrival today. People are living 3 decades longer often. They're working longer or choosing to retire in different ways. I'm not against retirement, but it's only a choice. It's not an obligation in certain ways. And so I grew up, my father worked for the same organization for 40 years, retired, and died 24 months later. And it kind of freaked me out because I thought he kind of had it together. But he was 68 years old, and he died. And he had enough money, and he had enough medicine, health, but I think he missed the why in certain ways. So sometimes we live what I call a default life. Did your career choose you, or did you choose it? And is it time now to re-choose the why you're doing what you're doing, to revisit the who am I doing and how am I doing, the why question. The default life is like looking in the rearview mirror. Sometimes this is where I was living. This is what was available to me. People talk to me about, oh, you'd be really good in nursing or medicine or healthcare or whatever. So it's good to look back, but it's also good to look forward. Are you living a default life? The pandemic lifted up that question for so many people to say, you know, I'm at a certain stage in life where I just need to revisit why I'm doing this, how I'm doing this, where I'm visiting this. They call it the Great Resignation today. It's in the media all the time. But really it's about the Great Reimagining. This has been going on for a long time, but now it's public. And now it's more on the front and not in the back story, and people are willing to talk about it in certain ways. And so what about the good life? Here's the new model that I've been studying now and researching for the last period of time. And if you look at it, it's not about learn, earn, and retire. It's about learn, earn, reimagine, reimagine, and reimagine. So we have this whole new life stage. And the science now, much of the studies show that the second half of life, you see how that curve goes up? That means happiness and fulfillment, personal growth. And so what is your sense of the good life? I have been leading walking trips, walking safaris in Tanzania, East Africa for 35 years. I didn't do it over the last 2 years, which I'm mourning these days and wanting to get back. But on one of those trips, it was a backpacking trip. Picture yourself, even if you would never consider doing this, picture yourself with a pack. And you're in the green hills of Africa, and you've got Kilimanjaro on one side, and you've got the Serengeti on the other side, and you're hiking through the beautiful green hills of Africa at the grace of a tribe called the Maasai. And I'm the leader of this, and leading along with a man named Koye, who's a Maasai elder, leading us, 12 of us, through this walking trip in East Africa. And I'm carrying this pack. Picture yourself carrying the pack. We're walking along, and Koye keeps looking over his shoulder at my pack, wondering why I keep looking at the ground. They call it, slogging in certain ways. I was missing what was going on the left and the right in many ways because I was weighed down. And so were you, possibly, because you were carrying what I told you on my checklist to bring as well. We get to where we're going to be for the night, and Koye comes over and says, "Richard, can you show me what's in these things? Why are you carrying all this?" Because all he's carrying is a herding stick and a spear. And he's walking upright, and I'm walking down like this, certain ways. And so I proceed to take everything out of my pack to show him what I'm carrying. Out comes the first aid kit, the wilderness first aid kit, which I'm pretty good at using. Out comes my Gore-Tex rain gear. I'm trying to explain Gore-Tex in Swahili to him when I can't even know it in English. And showing him all these things, and pretty soon I've got this pile, like the clowns in the car at the circus, coming out of a lot of stuff. And he comes over and he asks me this single question. He says, "Richard, tell me, does all this make you happy? What makes us happy?" I started to look at that, and I started to repack my bag, everything back, and I realized I was going to leave about half of what I was carrying here at the village because I was weighed down. That night around the fire, what happened was that people started to say, "Well, I'm over here." They didn't use the word reimagine. They said to repack my life bags and look at what makes me happy in the next phase of life. What makes you happy? Does all this make you happy? I came back and I co-authored a book called Repacking Your Bags, Lighten Your Load for the Good Life. And here's what we discovered in my philosophy professor colleague and I did the research. He's a philosopher, so he went all the way back to Aristotle and Plato and many others to look at what is the good life? How do we define the good life? We're all an experiment of one, but we found 4 characteristics. So please make a mental note or jot this down. The 4 characteristics of the good life are place, people, right work, and purpose. Are you living in the place you love, with the people you love, doing the work you love, or what I'll call right work, and I'm going to define that very closely in a minute. Right work with purpose. In addition to health and money, those are the 4 characteristics that we found over and over again in our interviews and our studies over time that make the good life for people. Place, people, right work, and purpose, the good life. And so as we look at this whole concept of the good life, we turn from the rearview mirror, the way we're living now, to the windshield. And the windshield's a lot bigger than the rearview mirror. So as you look out at your own vision of the good life, I want to push the pause button here and take just 30 seconds. I know this is dangerous to try, but I'm going to do it anyway. And I'd like you to just turn to one person and have just 30 seconds each, kind of a quick checkup on, are you living in the good life as I just defined it? Are you living in the place you love, with people you love, doing the work you love with purpose? So just a quick pause, check in with one person next to you. In a minute or two, I'll bring you back again. So go ahead, please. Going it alone is an incredibly bad idea at any age or stage. One of the things I recommend as a coach is that you have a sound to leaders like you, managers, is to have a sounding board, to not go it alone. Who's on your sounding board? A sounding board is like your kitchen cabinet, the people you can talk to that practice care versus cure. They're not there to fix you and give you they're there to ask you good questions and to listen and tell me more about that. They're interested versus always trying to be interesting. And so a sounding board, you can have one person or more, but the ones I recommend are these. First, committed listener. Who is your committed listener? Who's your go-to person that you can talk to about a challenge, a crucible, or a celebration in many ways? You can have more than one, but without one, you're cooked. And you're carrying more around than you need to. So who's your committed listener? And are you a committed listener? Who would pick you? As a manager or leader, are people willing to talk with you? Do they have a voice in your organization? Secondly, who's your wise elder? Viktor Frankl's a wise elder. He's deceased now for a decade, but what would Viktor say about this? And for you, who are you? It doesn't have to be a deceased, but who are your wise elders? And third, who are your wise youngers? Who are the people that are a bit younger than you that ask you what may be naive questions? Like, well, what did you want to do when you grew up? And are you doing it now? And how's that working out? As they look at their own lives. And the fourth person is a purpose partner. Somebody who is willing to hold your feet to the fire, to say, you said you were going to do this, did you do it? You said you were going to wake up this week and ask the why question, did you do it, for example? So that's a purpose partner. So think about who your committed listener, and sometimes in gatherings like this, they're like mini sounding boards. You can talk with each other about things and not have it all together. Just say, I'm thinking about, and I'm exploring without someone, well, if I were you, I'd do this. It's like, well, tell me more about that. You can have a conversation here with committed listeners. So the good life leads to right work. And so is your calling calling? Calling is another word for purpose. And Viktor Frankl drew this diagram for me. The horizontal line is failure to success. We can all put ourselves on the outer line of failure to success. And it's usually considering money or resources or success, power perhaps in the outer world. Then he drew the vertical line, which was from meaning at the top and fulfillment to despair at the bottom. And he said what he observes is that what all of us want is success with fulfillment. We know people who are successful and not fulfilled, and we know people who are fulfilled that don't have the ultimate success. He said the lower left-hand box is a job. Do you have a job? Have you had a job? It doesn't necessarily bring you up the ladder of success and doesn't necessarily give you meaning, but it pays the bills. And sometimes that's what it gets down to, and that's what we have to do. Or do you have a career? A career often brings us up the ladder and gives us some level of meaning. But at certain times, what Frankl said is we are faced with what he called EV, not ED, EV, existential vacuum. We're at a point where, it just isn't as fulfilling anymore. What do I need? How do I grow? What do I need to do? Do I need to go somewhere else to do it or stay here? How can I open up the conversation in certain ways with myself and others? And then he said, sometimes we have a sense of mission. Sometimes a job and a mission. We have a job, but our mission is at home or in our community or our faith organizations or somewhere else. But where I went with it was calling. He said what ultimately people want is success with fulfillment. Why? You spend 60+% of your most valuable currency, your time, working. And if it's not a good investment of your most precious currency, time, then it needs to be relooked at again. So what is your calling? Calling is that inner urge to want to grow or do something else. And so here's the test. I call it the Got a Minute School of Coaching. Because people say today, because they're so busy, as I said earlier, they'll say, Richard, you got a minute? Can you tell me what I should do with the rest of my life? And I'll say, well, if you only got a minute, take out a napkin. And actually, this idea came to me, because a lot of good ideas came to napkins, but I fly Delta out of Minneapolis, so it's where I'm. And so there's a napkin that says, great ideas come on the back of napkins. So I'm sitting next to a guy after my PBS special who's bugging me. It said, tell me, you got a minute? And I said, yeah, write down this on this napkin. So I'm asking you to write this down now. I don't know if you have a napkin in front of you, but write down this formula, please. The Got a Minute School of Coaching is the napkin test. This is the pattern. Everybody's different, but everyone has a pattern. Are you using your most enjoyed gifts on things you really feel passionate about, curious, deeply involved in an environment that fits your values? And you can ask yourself on the converse, or the other side of that, are you helping others? I taught for many years with the late Stephen Covey, who wrote The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. But before he died in an unexpected bicycling accident at the age of 80, he wrote another book called The 8th Habit. And the 8th habit, he said, is discerning your calling and helping others do the same. He said that is the calling that the 7 habits are in the service of in certain ways. So gifts plus passions plus values equals calling. Let me just ask you a quick question on gifts. A gift, I've studied this for a long time, has 4 characteristics. A gift, think of something you really love to do, that your hand turns to naturally. And don't be too skeptical about this. When I ask you this, let me ask you, how many of you have brothers and sisters? The majority, but not everybody. Are your brothers and sisters' gifts, natural talents, the same as yours? I mean, no. There may be some overlap, but when did you start to notice? Way early, right? When you were little, same environment, gifts differing. So when I developed a tool called calling cards to help people discern their gifts, they had these 4 characteristics, and they were different for different people. Number 1, it's something you love to do. You don't even have to be paid to do it. You just love to do it. Your hand turned to it naturally, and you've been doing it a long time. Secondly, others observe you doing it really effectively and effortlessly and enjoying it. And why do they observe it? Because they don't have it, and they value it, and they may even come to you for help with it in certain ways. And third, this is the biggie, you can't recall learning it. I don't know, I've just always been doing this. I don't have a degree in it. I don't have a certificate in it. I'm not an RN in it, or don't have the credential, but I just do it naturally and effortlessly and well. And fourth, I love learning more about it and hanging out with other people. So when you think about this, what if you had an organization and a team that were bringing their gifts, passions, and values to work on a day-to-day basis? How much do you know about your own gifts these days, and how much do you know about theirs? And because what they want is a voice, and what they want is to bring who they are to what they do in many ways. And so I want to do one more quick check with you, and that is another 1 minute each, and just say, turn to the person next to you and just answer the gifts question. Say, the gift that comes up to me is kind of my number 1 gift that I really love to do is blank. And if you don't have an answer, that's okay. It's something that I'll give you a little bit more to chew on in a second. But just turn to the same person you were talking to before and just say, well, my number 1 gift is, and don't be shy about it. Just own it right now, okay? So number 1, I love to do this. Turn to the person next to you. I believe that the napkin test formula, which has been well studied in many places, is part of the answer to what they're calling the Great Resignation these days. People want to bring more, to grow whole, to bring more of who they are to what they do, and to have a voice in matters. You know, and I know, that the number 1 knockout factor in most career research is the values question. People may have a good job, maybe go to somewhere else where they can ply their trade more with a greater voice in matters. They want to be heard, and they want to be understood in certain ways. And so using your gifts on things you feel passionate about. Curious, are you curious, and are you a learner these days? I had the privilege of being backstage a while back with the founder of TED. TED Talks, T-E-D, TED Talks. Richard Saul Warman in the 80s created TED. It really was created on the back of what he called the ultimate dinner conversation, where you would bring someone from technology, entertainment, design together around a certain question to solve. And he was curious, and he said, TED, billions of people watching TED Talks, it's about curiosity. So he said to me, Richard, what are you going to be talking about? I said, purpose. And he kind of, older than me, kind of scoffed at me, and he said, well, young man, I'm going to be talking about curiosity. Don't you think that curiosity is the fuel that drives purpose? And I said, absolutely. If you're not curious about yourself and self-aware, you're not going to be doing that with helping others to be curious and self-aware. Are you curious about what you're doing? Are you growing? Or are you burned out, rusting out, kind of flat in terms of your own curiosity these days? So naming your gifts and bringing those gifts to something you really care about in an environment that fits who you are, I believe is the core of the great reimagining and great resignation that's going on these days. And so you could think about it this way. I had it here somewhere, but on the back of a business card, the front of a business card, what it says? Form, right? What's on the back of your business card? That's the essence. That's who you bring to that. How much aliveness, how much curiosity, how much joy, how much making a difference in others' lives. So on the back of your business card really is what I'm talking about here, not the form on the front. I love books. I love writing books, reading books, holding books, etc. I'm going to be signing books later if you're interested out here when I'm done here. But I was in a bookstore a while back, literally went into a bookstore, and the woman at the information desk said, I asked her, I said, can you tell me where the self-help section is? And she looked at me and smiled and said, well, if I tell you, won't that defeat the whole purpose? So, I thought that was a great line. I should have hired her on the spot. But so the whole business, it's not about self-help. It's about self-realization. It's about realizing who our authentic self is and bringing it out, naming it and bringing it forward. And so this is the test to unlock the power of purpose. Take a Post-it tonight, tomorrow, sometime. Here's mine. And write grow and give. Write the RX, grow and give, on this Post-it. And put that on a mirror where you can see it when you first wake up in the morning. And ask yourself this question: how am I going to grow and give today? And at the end of the day, before you go to bed at night, ask yourself, how did I do at growing and giving today? And if you take this challenge and do it, you will understand the power of purpose and unlocking the power of purpose, because you'll have a felt sense, not a concept, but a felt sense of what it feels like to really get up every day beyond the self, to make a difference in the life of one other person. That's the main message that I have. And this thing called purpose, it's not always, you don't always get a lot of applause for it. You don't always get a lot of recognition for it, but you get a felt sense of living a meaningful life, which is what I think we're all after. A while back, I was doing a talk like this to an audience about this size, and somebody actually walked on the stage and handed me a piece of paper and said, call home now, underlined. And I went, now? And they said, now. So I paused, turned it over to a colleague to complete what I was going to do there, went to call, and they said, Richard, your mother has had a stroke, my wife. Your mother has had a stroke. She's in St. Joseph's Hospital in intensive care in St. Paul, Minnesota. It doesn't look like she's going to make it through the night. You better come home now. This is about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And I was about 4 hours by car in northern Minnesota at a resort where I was doing a conference center where I was doing this talk. And so I decided that I had to leave and turn it over to my colleague. And my mother had cancer, breast cancer, and was 10 years earlier and was doing great. And I thought, walking and doing things to take care of herself socially, et cetera, but here it was. So I got there, and when I got in the car and the sun was going down, it felt different because the sunset felt like an ending in certain ways, and the music the words took on a different meaning. I got there about 11 o'clock at night, and I went into intensive care alone and asked the intensive care nurse if she could just let me be there for a minute by myself. And I just lost it. I had never been in a situation. You in this room know this situation well. I didn't. And I didn't know what to do, so after crying for a period of time, I did, which is probably illegal, but I got up on the bed and I picked her up and I held her and I said only two things. I said, Mom, I think it's time to go. Thank you. And when I said thank you, she opened her eyes, took 2 more breaths, and died in my arms. And I learned more, like you do, in that purpose moment than all this science, all this research, because in the end, we all want to be thanked. We all want to think that our life mattered. Mattering matters. She was a stay-at-home mom, immigrant father, worked hard, 2 sons, did her job as a mother and as a volunteer and else otherwise. But I think all of us, we need to look at a living legacy now, because at the end, that's it. And the breath was gone, her life was gone, but her purpose remained. And it really informed me to really take a deeper dive into this whole sense of purpose and meaning in life in many ways. So what I've tried to do is to share some ideas about a checkup and why it's important to push the pause button and step back and look at things, to reflect, to look at courage, decisions, choices we're making, and ultimately to look at mattering. Purpose matters. And I've tried to share that purpose is a verb. It's an action. It's what we do. It's not just what we say. Secondly, it's a path. It's a journey we're on that we can choose to activate on a day-to-day basis. And it's a practice. It's something that we can get better at, and out of that find more fulfillment. So I hope you had at least one insight come to you that would be useful, and I hope you'll take the challenge, the Post-it challenge. When I did the PBS special, I found whole families showed up. And to this day, I still get feedback that they've got this on their mirror because it gave them something to talk about that was simple and meaningful. The grandparent, the parent, the kids, they were all there saying, we're all at a what's next moment. And we're all looking for something that's conversational and practical that we can do. So I hope that that landed on you that way. And I want to thank you for the privilege of your listening, because it's always a great thing to be here and be face to face with you. So thank you so much.
Hello, Richard. I really, really enjoyed getting to see that again. We're so delighted that you could be here, and welcome, showing up live this early in the morning. We want to go over a few questions that first I'm going to start because I really have enjoyed reading your book and getting to see your presentation live.
Thank you. It's unusual for me to have the privilege of actually watching myself, which it was, I was really curious to see how it felt, and it felt good. So thank you.
Yes, excellent message. So I'm going to get us started. Like I said, I'd like to ask you a couple of questions. My first one is, you spoke about growing and giving is a key ingredient in enjoying our older years. Can you give me just a few examples of what you mean by that?
Well, I spoke to the fact that there are 1,440 purpose moments in a day. If you take sleep out of it, it would obviously be less. And those moments, those 1-minute moments, are chances to make a difference in someone's life. So the distinction between having a purpose and living purposefully is that you make a difference in at least one person's life every day. You have a mindset and the choice to do that. And over time, there's a real felt sense of fulfillment versus happiness that comes from not only growing, but giving. So that's the giving part. The growing part, Cindy, is simply that if we're not growing and we're not curious, we don't have something to give ultimately. And so growing means that we're curious about ourselves. And, and there's an old, I think even Bob Dylan, the songwriter said, grow or die. He or she who is not busy being born is busy dying. Well, growing means continually to be curious about self, curious about others, and then reaching out. And so the grow and give part, I think, is a very simple test of why we're here. What are we here to do? And ultimately, to finish, I think we're here to serve. If not, I invite the listeners to say, well, what are we here to do? What on earth are we here to do? Well, I think we're here to serve others, to also savor, to enjoy life, and to do things like that. But growing and giving kind of helps us, like a mantra or a practice, to lead to that fulfillment.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we took it really to heart. My husband and I, who was able to join me, and we have our little Post-its up, and we ask each other at the end of a long day. And usually we try to say yes.
Yeah.
We do have.
It does. I mean, I think to that point, which is really a good one. And I met him, so say hello. And
I will.
It gives us something to a conversation to talk about. Well, what is it that we're doing here? What's the point of the exercise? And why are we doing what we're doing? And I think every reflective person eventually is faced with the existential question: why? What's the point of the exercise? And this is one simple way into that conversation.
Yes. We have a question from our audience, from Charlie. How can we use your practices for team building in the OR, specifically in a culture where the focus is on fast-paced nature of healthcare and getting the needs of the patients met first? Ooh, great question.
Well, it is great, and there's a lot of layers to it. So let's look at the team building, because the fast-paced nature is the second question for me. Team building, I talk about, are you with your team on the same page? How do you know if you're on the same page? And so if you had a 4-box quadrant, I have what it's called the same page exercise. The top left box is purpose. Are we on the same page in terms of purpose? Who we serve, how we serve, and don't take it for granted just because you're in the healthcare business or in the medical field that's an automatic. Secondly, vision. What does succeeding look like a year from now? If we're really on it with ourselves, what does succeeding look like in a year from now as a team? Not just as an organization, but as a team. And what are the 3 key big rocks, I call them, but imperatives that we need to pay attention to every time we meet? Every time we meet, make sure we're not talking about majoring in the minors here. We're talking about the majors and the big rocks. And then the bottom left-hand corner is practice. How do we communicate? This is where the breakdown is oftentimes. We assume that people are communicating, and in fact, they're not. They don't feel like they have a voice, and that's the reason that many people bail out on their jobs or do only what's required, because they don't feel like they fit, or our practices in terms of communication are not really disciplined. And so we put in there, what kind of practices do we use to make sure that we're communicating effectively? In the lower right-hand box is talent. Do we have the right people in the right seats on the bus, so to speak? And not only that, so let's assume that's structured, and we don't have a lot to say about that. But the key ingredient is, do I know the gifts? Remember I talked about gifts in my talk? Do I actually know the gifts of my teammates? And am I bringing out those best gifts in certain ways beyond just their role or their job description? So when you put that on the same page, and you ask the team, how are we doing as a team? At the bottom, just picture a line from not a high-performing team to a high-performing team. And in the middle is kind of a group. So 1 to 5. Is my team a high-performing team? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If it's a 5, those boxes are real clear and filled in with discipline practices. And when you start to ask the team the question, how are we doing? And you check in on a regular basis, you might be surprised with what you hear. So that's a team building practice that I found. I work all over the world with it. It's so simple, but it's something that every time during a meeting, at the end of the meeting, we can say, Cindy, how did we do today on purpose, on vision, on practices, on bringing our best gifts forward? And, and at the end of the year, we can say, hey, we did a good job, or we're only a 3, we need to improve. And so specifically a culture with a focus on fast-paced nature of healthcare, we need to push the pause button and check in with each other on a regular basis. There's just no way around it. Otherwise, we're going to really lose our focus. So the same page exercise is one way to do that.
Thank you. That helps me personally with the things that I'm doing. And Charlie, thank you for asking that question, bringing it up. Yeah. We have another question from Chris.
Can I just add one thing?
Yes.
That I just thought of, and that is, with your team, let's just say you're going to use this 4-quadrant practice. Pick one person, maybe for a month or more, who's kind of the Yoda, not the leader, like the team leader or the supervisor, but the Yoda who says, okay, let's check in. How do we do today? So at the end of the meeting, they raise their hand and say, let's look at those 4 quadrants and just quickly in 2 or 3 minutes say how we did. And that person's going to grow because they're going to start looking at things themselves, and then someone else will get that practice. They'll grow as leaders as well.
Ooh, good idea. I love that. We have another question from Chris. In regards to growing, how can a leader reignite the flame to grow in a stagnant environment? Oh, yes.
Ooh.
Yeah.
With great difficulty. But the problem is time. Busyness is hijacking time. And there needs to be time it can be just short time, but to bring in some sense of growth. First of all, find out what they're curious about, what they want in certain ways. And, as I said, the future belongs to the learners, not the knowers. And stagnation comes from replication over time. And I call it rust out. Mm-hmm. Rust out is burnout is overdoing. Rust out is under being. How can I bring, and let's talk about our gifts. How can I grow this gift that I love to do more? How can I bring more of it into the workplace type of thing? And so if you use that napkin test and you look at, to start with gifts, and then secondly, passions. What are we passionate about here? What is as a group or team that we want to learn more about? I find that people want to grow, but oftentimes time is the enemy. We don't have time for that. And pretty soon we're rusted out and we're stagnant. So I don't have an easy answer to that other than to set aside some really structured time, which will actually pay off for our patients and ourselves.
Thank you. We have another question from our audience, and I believe it's from, is it Tammy? She says, yes to growing and giving, first for teammates or in one's personal life. 2, for yourself, grow and give to yourself as well each day. And yes, you certainly touched on that. You've got to have some personal growth before you can reach out to others. You want to expand on that just a touch?
Well, I think Tammy has said it well. And it's, basically all I would say is you can't give away what you don't own.
Oh, that is so true.
If you're not growing yourself, because people look at you not just from what you say, but in your role, but actually your own. Are you on your own growth edge? And it gets down to, I talked about meeting with the founder of TED, and he talked about TED being founded on curiosity. And so the question is, what are you curious about? He said, when he founded TED that it was about the ultimate dinner party. In other words, who would I invite and what would be the question that I want to listen to or discuss with people? And so, the question is, what are you curious about? You meaning Tammy and listeners. And what would you like to, who would you like to invite in here? There's so much in YouTube and TED and everything else that you don't have to be live. You can bring them in and then discuss what your different perspectives on that. I found, during this pandemic and being on a virtual book tour, as I mentioned at the beginning of my talk, people are really yearning for what I would call deep conversation, deeper conversation, and to grow. And when you face death and you face the perspective of illness and things like that, it makes people more curious, I believe, in certain ways, and more cognizant of their most precious currency, which is not money, it's time, and how they spend their time. And growing and giving, as I said, can be just a couple minutes a day, but it's ultimately you find, oh, this feels good, that there's a felt sense to this.
Kind of takes me right to a question that I had, is the future belongs to learners.
Yeah.
Is any type of learning applicable?
Well, it depends. I also said everybody's an experiment of one. And that isolation is fatal. So do you want to learn alone? Do you want to learn with a team or group? Everybody's different in the way that their learning style is and how they like to go about things. I'm somebody who likes to get up every morning and read and reflect and journal and write. For some people, that would be not something they would like to do. They're not only is it not in the morning, but it's the way that. So I think but it depends. Everyone's an experiment of one. But the other thing is, it's not lifelong learning; it's long life learning. We're living longer. So I talk about long life learning, meaning if you're going to live a long life, you can't just live your life looking in the rearview mirror. So there's a distinction here, Cindy, that I think is really important, and I know you know it well, between a growth mindset and a fixed mindset.
Oh, yeah.
And a researcher named Carol Dweck, D-W-E-C-K, if you want to Google it, did a whole research study on vitality and aging as it relates to a fixed mindset versus a growth mindset. And a growth mindset is one that is open to self-curiosity and curiosity about others. And a fixed mindset is somebody who just wants to punch the button and do the job and move on. And so I am hungry, as many are, to hang out with people who have a growth mindset.
Yes, as I say, there are no stupid questions. And so many times at meetings, I will, say, okay, I'm going to ask the stupid question because some of the people around here probably have the same question I do. And so you need to be able to step up and ask those questions.
There's a great book called by Warren Berger called A More Beautiful Question. And he says that really vitality, and he studied questions, and he's done it with that. First of all, innovation happens from questions. And if you look at any of these major companies that are innovating like crazy, they're living in a certain question. But as individuals, we're also living in questions. And so what is your more beautiful question?
Yes.
For
and
yourself?
It makes you start thinking, okay, I've got to revise this maybe a little bit.
Yeah.
I want to remind the audience.
That's why the question, why,
Yeah,
is the core of purpose. Why? And
exactly.
That's an essential, fundamental core question.
And ask why 5 times.
you go. That's right.
Yeah, I want to remind our audience we still have plenty of time to get your questions in. So type those questions in. We'll be sure and get to them. It's not often that we get to have our keynote live at a virtual event. So once again, I really thank you for doing this, Richard. So in speaking about the napkin little thing that you had about gift plus passion equals plus value equals your calling.
Right.
So what if you can't figure it out on your own? And could someone who knew you really well help with that equation?
Great question. Yes. There's two answers I'll give. One is that my website, richardleider.com, if you go to the toolbar where it says resources and you dig down, you'll see an exercise called calling cards. What is my calling? You can do that exercise and it will help you to discern this. It will take you for a deeper dive into it. The more simple way is to take out 5 index cards and write at the top, what are my gifts that you see? And then you give those to 5 people in your sounding board or 5 people in your life and ask those people what they see you. And I gave the definition of a gift is something you love to do. Others observe you doing it. You can't recall learning it and you love. So just go on the first thing and what do you see me loving to do? And what do you see me maybe not loving to do? And then you look for the thread and you see if there's any commonality to what they're seeing and things that you might not see yourself. And one of the things I said when I talked about gifts that oftentimes is really a showstopper is that I can't recall learning it. Therefore, I don't give it a whole lot of credibility because if it's that easy and I just got it from birth or got it, naturally, it must be not that valuable. But the key is it's core to who we are. So let me read you a piece from a man named William Stafford who wrote a poem a day for 30 years. Figure that out.
Yeah.
And when asked by me in a board meeting how he could do that, he said, simple, lower your expectations. He got up every day because he loved to write. His calling was to write. Now, much of what he wrote didn't end up being a published poem, but he got up to write every day. And one of the poems he wrote is called The Way It Is, and it's very short. So let me say, because it kind of answers the question here. He said, there's a thread you follow. It goes among things that change, but it doesn't change. People wonder about what you're pursuing. You have to explain about the thread, but it's hard for others to see. While you hold it, you can't get lost. Tragedies happen, people get hurt or die, and you suffer and get old. Nothing you do can stop time's unfolding. You don't ever let go of the thread. And I think the thread for many people is their number one gift, what they love to do, and they keep holding on to that and coming back to that. And others may not know what you're pursuing, but so that's one way to think about it. So my thread is I listen for a living. I love to listen, and I'm not always that great at it with everybody, but when I really pay attention, I'm really there's a certain knowing or a certain listening that I have that I've had for as long as I can recall. And it's not just because I'm a coach or a counselor by training. I had it well before that. So when you think about it, though, what is your gift, your thread, and how can you hold on to that? That's probably your purpose in one or another. If you come back to that number one gift and that thread, it's probably, you can rename it something else, but it's probably a good enough step to write down and name your purpose.
Yeah. Oh, that's very helpful. Thank you, Richard. We have another question from Carrie. Do you have a favorite quote or book that you would suggest everyone check out?
Well, of course, my books, but
yes, of course.
Yes. The book that I think is a must is, I gave a quote from Viktor Frankl, and
Mm-hmm.
the book is Man's Search for Meaning.
Mm-hmm.
He also, in Man's Search for Meaning, the Library of Congress in the U.S. named the 25 most important books in American history. And Man's Search for Meaning, written by a Viennese neurologist who was in concentration camps, was number 12 on that list. And I find that I go back to that book at least once a year, maybe more often. And it talks about his experience in the concentration camps, which is profoundly moving.
Mm-hmm.
But also out of that choice, in spite of our adversities, what are our choices? And he talks about, in spite of everything, say yes to life. And so, and he has great wisdom, and it's a short read, meaning it's not a big, long,
Mm-hmm.
complicated tome. But I think for many people, when I talk about it, they'll say, "Oh, I read that in college. I read it all the time. It changed my life." And it's out in, I think, 30 editions and 30 languages, and he got 30 honorary doctorates before there's real profound wisdom in that. So Man's Search for Meaning is my answer.
Thank you. We have another question from Christina. And please, those who are out there, we still have plenty of time to get your questions answered with Richard. All right. So, Christina, do you have any handouts or resources on the 4-quadrant exercise?
Which one? The one I just talked about, the same page, or the one that is your calling? I assume that this is on the same page. And what I can do and will do is I will send it to you. And yes,
Mm-hmm.
I do. I do have a handout on this that's a real easily usable, and I welcome people to use it and give me feedback on how it works or doesn't work. But
Mm-hmm.
but I can send the same. Okay, Christina, same page. She says yes.
Yeah.
So I will send that to you. I don't think it's up there, but here's what I'll do. I'll put it up there in richardleider.com resources. I'll have my assistant, Christine Bedwell, put it up there today, and it'll be up there for you as a free download.
Mm-hmm. And
send it to you as well.
Yeah. Yes. And we can always try to help get those to our audience members so that they maybe have more than one way to get your resources and tools.
I think also, just I'm thinking on the fly here because we're live, mm-hmm. that Cindy, you and I could do a little editing on this with Mike and Carrie and mm-hmm. others to and say, well, maybe there's a way that we can co-brand it, to be more. The content is very specific, but it could be maybe languaged a little bit differently to fit into the OR world. Mm-hmm. So we could have an OR same page tool and. With attribution to me, but free for people across the country.
Well, believe me, I would be thrilled to help.
It's really a powerful tool. It works. I mean, there's a lot of things I've tried that come and go, perhaps after experimenting, but this one is stuck mm-hmm. over it because it works. And once people start to use it, even boards of directors use it that normally don't have these kinds of discipline practices. But it just is a very simple thumbnail practice that absolutely works.
Yeah, that is, I'll be using it for sure. So,
yeah.
So I do have another question that I would like to ask as we have our audience work on some more questions.
Yeah.
You talked about the Great Resignation.
Yeah.
Why? And you spoke a little bit about that. And do you see any institutions utilizing the listening, doing more, or trying to understand as a method to engage staff members? Or is this more of an individual want or need?
Well, it's all of the above. I see organizations that are saying that people today want to work for leaders they trust. And a trusted leader is not just a nice person, it's someone who listens and who gets them, who really asks and gets them. And that's hard because we don't have a lot of time to spend with all of our direct reports, so to speak, or all our team members. But that's the hunger. The hunger is to have a voice. And I mentioned in my talk that I worked for many years with Stephen Covey, and he wrote the book, The Eighth Habit, which after his 7 Habits, international bestseller, just before he died, he came out with the book, The Eighth Habit. And he said, the most important habit for leaders is to discern their own gifts and help others do the same. And, that's not an easy ask, to figure that out. So we do see institutions that are putting this into their leadership development. This whole business of how do I have this courageous conversation and this courageous listening with others? What are the practices for doing that? And so, that involves listening, and it involves time, and it involves, what are you listening for? The napkin test. What you're looking, what is this person's gifts? What are their interests, their passions, and what are their values? How do they like to operate? Now, we can't always get that 100%, but if I don't ask, I don't know. And so, it's kind of, if you don't go, you don't know. If you don't ask, you don't know. And so, having that conversation is why the Great Resignation's been going on for a while now. It's not just about, there's a lot of layers to it. There could be a lot of pushback on, it's about money, it's about this. But basically, it's about culture. What's going on here, the psychological contract of working in a place and we'll just take care of you and don't worry about it, that's over. You got to take care of yourself, but you have some help with trusted teammates and leaders. So I don't know if that gets at it exactly, but I have organizations I work with that have almost every, it's a hyperbole, but almost every leadership development program today in a university or an organization has purpose in it. Helping the leader say, what's your purpose as a leader? And what's the purpose of this team? And what's the purpose of this organization? And you look at the millennials, they want to work for organizations that matter, not just social, nonprofit organizations, but organizations that really know what they're up for in their clients and patients and things like this, and practice that. A lot of layers to that, but I do believe that there's many institutions, and leadership development today has to have purpose in the center of it to really be effective.
Yeah, that kind of takes me right into, you were talking about the great reimagining. And, it's difficult as a leader. Sometimes you yourself are exhausted and worn out. And we heard a lot of that theme through our conference. And so how do you encourage leaders to bring about and help with that great reimagining?
Well, self-care is obviously, we talked about burnout and rust out and things like that. And there's a lot of, most people know about diet and nutrition and exercise and sleep and things like that. But the center of it for me is relationships. So the center of it for self-care is don't go it alone. Isolation is fatal. Have a sounding board. Who are I mentioned, and I'll repeat it here, who's in your kitchen cabinet? Who's in your sounding board? Who do you talk to about what's up with you? And are you, as a leader, someone that they can talk to? But the kitchen cabinet or the sounding board has first and foremost a committed listener, at least one. Someone who practices care versus cure. Care is enough to tell me more about that, Cindy. Give me some examples rather than me filling in the space with my cure, so to speak. They practice being interested versus always trying to be interesting.
Yeah.
And they ask good questions and things like that. And so this yearning for a committed listener, I said that purpose is age agnostic. Well, the yearning for this committed listener is way age agnostic, meaning people want someone they can talk to, someone who gets them. And if they want advice, they can ask for it, but they just want to talk and get it out and figure it out for themselves over time. So I think that's the big one there, is to have a committed listener. There is, I also say have a wise elder and a wise younger and a purpose partner. But I think the committed listener is really the core. I, way back a long time ago, had a fellowship as part of the Harvard Study of Adult Development, which is the longest standing study of progressive longitudinal study of adult life. And the number one thing that they have over all the years come up with is that vitality and health and longevity is about relationships. And it's not just about having relationships, it's about the kind of relationships we have in this whole business of somebody who who gets us is core to that.
Yes. And for those who might not have that somebody, do you have any suggestions on how to find a sounding board?
Again, it really depends on people's situations, but oftentimes it's somebody who has the same passions we do, the same interests we do, the same curiosities, and we meet in certain ways. And sometimes it's just a matter of asking. It doesn't have to be for life. It can be for 30 days, or it could be for 6 months or a shorter period of time. I'm going through some interesting questioning right now.
Mm-hmm.
Would you mind being a purpose partner with me on that? And let's talk about calling cards. So let's do something that is an exercise we both can benefit. And there, as I mentioned, when I did the PBS special, whole families would show up, and they were all at a what's next moment. The grandparents, the parents, the kids, and sometimes the grandkids, and they were trying to figure out how to have a conversation without
Mm-hmm.
being the sage on the stage, sort of giving advice to each other, but to be listening and being curious. And we want what's best for our family members, et cetera, but that doesn't often come through advice and telling. It often comes through listening and just being there, being present to their own situation.
Yes. I also wanted to let you know and let our audience know that we're going to be scrolling your URL across the bottom there if you want to go and check out Richard's tools, videos, his blog. I know he welcomes you to visit that and to touch base with him again through his URL, through his blog. And
everything is free, Cindy. You won't be asked to sign up for anything. You won't be asked to give your email. You won't be asked to buy anything. So I'm at that point where I have enough intellectual property to share with the world that I want to impact. I want it to work. And if it doesn't work, don't use it. Use something else. But if it works, let me know.
Yes, absolutely. And we are coming up to the end of our time that we get to spend with Richard. And Richard, thank you so much for taking time this morning.
Love this two-part process of being present with people and then coming back. And I hope that maybe I'll get a second shot at here in the future as you move forward. So thank you. And I've really enjoyed meeting all of you.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so very much. You can also go to https://richardleider.com/the-working-worried/ And if you couldn't write that down, just go richardleider.com. and we're all good at digging into things. So again, thank you so much, Richard. I do want to remind everyone that the call for proposals is now open for the 2022 OR Manager Conference in Denver. You can submit your proposal online at ormanager.com/proposal. I'd also like to remind everyone that the virtual expo hall is now open. We encourage you to visit the virtual booth while you are waiting for the next session to begin. And again, thank you, Richard, for joining us. And thank you to our audience for attending today. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Cindy.